Welcome to the Founders Fire podcast. Excited to have you guys here with us today and extremely excited to share a conversation with Dr. Michael Turner, who is a consummate professional and just has one of the most amazing histories, not only from his education, just his life story. I'm so excited to share with you guys his path. He and I have worked together. We're colleagues, not in the medical world, but in the world, I would say, of transformation. And we've done several events together and a handful of things really that are all about reclaiming what really is our birthright. You know, it's our birthright to be full energy, full focus, full bringing our absolute best mind, body, and spirit to the endeavors that are in front of us. As I've been able to get to know Michael over the past few years and his family, just to be so thoroughly impressed with him as an entrepreneur, as a father, as a leader. He is a guy who is, we'll just say, he's a very brave man, and he is not afraid to go poke the monster in the eye and to stand up for truth and for what he knows to be true. And that's what we need. Founders Fire is about rekindling and lighting and igniting that fire inside of us. And I love to see the fire in Dr. Turner's heart. So without further ado, welcome, Michael. So glad you're here with us.
Oh, thank you, Eric. It's a pleasure. I'm looking forward to this discussion, and I'm confident that through what we talk about today, some people are going to be inspired and
Heck
blessed.
yeah.
That'd be my hope.
Yeah, man. Yeah. So I wouldn't do as good a job as you at an introduction. There'll be some stuff in the show notes, of course, but would you give us just kind of the your version of how you come to today and a little bit of what your journey has been?
Sure. Well, I'll do it in parallel. You know, the first story would be professionally, and then the second story personally, let's just say. But professionally, the highlights: I grew up in California. Um, Went to Stanford University undergrad, studied human biology, got interested in medicine through working at a summer camp, actually a camp run by Paul Newman. If you've seen the Newman Zone products, those
Yeah.
were started to fund a summer camp in Connecticut. So I was a counselor at the summer camp, pretty sick kids, HIV and AIDS, cancer, sickle cell anemia. And so I kind of got a passion for medicine and for helping children at that point. So I went back, finished up my undergrad, took the medical tests, et cetera. Took a couple years off before med school, actually, just because I was burned out. I had done very, very well, but I had studied really hard. It was quite a grind. And I thought, I'm just not ready to continue this pace at med school. I want to take a few years off.
Mhm.
Hence, I became a school teacher, actually, which is another point of commonality for us. So I taught school
Yeah.
for 2 years, and then went on to medical school. And, by the grace of God, a lot of doors were open for me. I could pretty much choose where I want to go. Ended up choosing to go to Harvard. So entered there, finished. Got married along the way, started a family, went to do my residency at the Mayo Clinic in Rochester, Minnesota. My field was physical medicine and rehabilitation, which focuses on rehabilitating people from their injuries. It started actually after World War II. A lot of injured vets coming back needed to be reintegrated into society. And so there was this whole science about reintegrating and managing people who were wounded.
Mhm.
And it's since progressed, but that was my field. I was always interested in musculoskeletal system and neurologic system, and I guess kind of mind body aspects of dealing with adversity and challenges and overcoming that kind of thing. So it was a great field for me.
Mhm.
Moved out to Washington State, took a job, and been out here in Washington State ever since. That was in 2009. And then my career took an interesting turn in 2020, which we may want to talk about, but I basically quit my day job, so to speak, with the hospital and launched out into the world of entrepreneurship and started Michael Turner MD PLLC. Started to learn about, taxes and lawyers
Oh
and
yeah.
marketing and websites and, customer relationship management software and all this
Yes,
stuff.
how to build
And
the
I'm like,
parachute once you jump out.
yeah, never having taken a business life in my life.
Yeah, yeah. Oh man.
So then we crossed paths, and that's been a major blessing, and we could talk about that. But you've been like my on-demand, off-the-shelf MBA program, under a 4 alarm fire conditions, building the spaceship as you're flying it.
Oh
to help me
man.
succeed in my practice, brother. And I really,
Uh,
really appreciate that.
oh, well, you're
Um,
doing a brilliant job, and I feel like, just everybody, listening right now, I just want to say, you know, um, we're all the product of trying to get around people that in some way are ahead of us. If you hang out with people and you're like, are any of your friends or any of the people around you ahead of you in any way? And you're like, no, you're probably not going to go anywhere. And I feel like just hearing, Michael's journey, part of what I want to point out is, he's trying to get himself into position to be, and he did, amongst the best in the world in a lot of different categories. And whether it's Stanford or Mayo Clinic or Harvard or other things that he's done, it's like, hey, I got to get out there. I mean, I think, Michael, one of the things I admire most about you is you're not just learned, you're not just an expert, you're not just brilliant. You are those things, but you're a learner. Like it's you didn't want to just grab knowledge and get a title. You're someone who's like, I want that knowledge. And I want to keep on that path of skill acquisition, of knowledge. And I feel like that's really something that is critical to success, is to stay in the position, and I'll use martial arts since that's some of my background, to stay in the position of the white belt. There's a famous story about the founder of judo, and judo is a martial art from Japan. Those of you who don't know about it, there's any of the dos tend to be Eastern martial arts. So Aikido, Karate Do, Judo, Iaido, all of those that end in do that are, they're talking about a way. That's what do means. Interestingly enough, back in the days of Jesus, that very first church actually was called the Way. There's some very interesting parallels there, that it's not just about head knowledge, but it's about what you implement. It's not just, I know this fact or I know this thing. It's like, okay, that's great. I mean, you need that as a foundation, but the mature, the real master is always in a point of recognizing how much they don't know. And so Kano, the guy who founded judo, high ranking black belt, I don't know what degree it was, 8 or 10 or whatever that, his system had. But when he was buried, his burial wishes were to be buried in his white belt. Like, I forever want to be known as a beginner, to have the beginner's mind. And that's really one of the things I appreciate so much about you, is that you have that thirst for knowledge. And then I would add to that probably what I would consider to be the most important characteristic of an entrepreneur, probably of a person in general, but for sure entrepreneurs, is courage. There are a lot of great virtues that we should all aspire to have. But I feel like courage is the virtue that operationalizes everything else.
Mhm.
Because without courage, those other things don't cross any thresholds. You have to have courage, and certainly you have come into knowledge that have acquired in this thirst for learning, that then required some courage. The implications of that knowledge are not benign. It's like,
Mhm.
that's not what we're hearing maybe on the news. That's not what we're hearing from the mainstream or whatever. So, just as we're kind of getting warmed up, I just want to say you've been such a great example to me, of a man who's on the journey, who's not resting on his accomplishments, and is continuing to grow. So I just want to say to people, when you hear Michael's resume, it's just, absolutely impressive, and like, wow. But I would rather you actually be impressed by a man who's dedicated to learning, because that pathway will have accolades, of course it will, but ultimately it's about the day in and day out, take another step, reflect on that step. Is it in alignment? What are the questions I have? That humility, that comes from, being willing to be a white belt, the lowest rank, in the army, a private. You're just a private. You're a nobody. You got nothing. It's like, if you have to wear your rank on your sleeve, if you have to always be about, the thing, I think that person's not going to go very far. But if you're in that place of humility, then it's like, okay, there's going to keep being, the opportunity to grow, because I think humility is a prerequisite for growth. So maybe let's do this. You mentioned, 2009, 2008, you get into, quote, your day job and whatnot.
Mhm.
Maybe talk with us about what attracted you to that, coming out of med school and the experiences that you had as a teacher. What attracted you to that kind of role specifically? And then maybe take us into, and when did it become that wasn't the thing anymore? I always say to clients, whenever you're going to quit something, ask yourself, why did you get into it to start off with?
Mhm.
And really compare those reasons. So maybe let's do that. Just talk about what brought you into that specific role that you got into, kind of your day job, and then what was the kind of the transition where you were like, this is
Mhm.
not really the thing anymore. Maybe walk us through how you made that decision.
Mhm. Sure, happy to. Well, coming out of residency, I had a stay-at-home wife, one child, and four recently adopted children. So family of five, and looking for a stable place to live and raise a family, good quality of life, stable employment. This was in 2009, so it was the height of the recession. It was actually about the worst time to be trying to look for a job.
Right.
So I was looking for stability and down home family atmosphere, and we found that. We've settled in a great city, and had a nice paycheck, benefits, 401k matching, health insurance for the family, all the good things. A little cubicle office, a staff waiting for me. So settled in, started working for the hospital. Very thankful for that security, and ramped up my medical practice. I had gone into the field because I was interested, as I said, in helping people in some of these specific ways with neurology, with orthopedics, with rehabilitation, and with coaching, inspiring, teaching, back to our teaching and learning concept. I love to be on both sides of that at all times, learning definitely every day. I make it my goal to learn something new. I discipline myself in that. And then also teaching, I think you and I both have a gift that way of communicating and inspiring and helping other people on their learning journey. So I brought a lot of the teaching and learning actually into my medical practice, which was one of the things that made me unique. I
Hmm.
basically never stopped being a teacher. So even though I was in there as a doctor, I was
Yeah.
like drawing things, pulling up pictures of things on my laptop, showing them models of your shoulder and your hip and talking and teaching, because I always figured if I could teach you to understand your problem as well as I do, then you
Mm,
would be as capable and as motivated to solve this problem as I am,
mm,
right? Like if
mm.
you knew how amazing your heart was and how wide those arteries are that keep you alive every day, hint, they're not that big, and therefore how delicate they are, you'd be pretty motivated to keep those arteries in good shape.
Yeah.
You care about your blood pressure, you care about getting some cardiac exercise in there, you'd watch your sugar intake, you'd watch your saturated fat,
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
you do some things.
Yeah.
Now instead, I
Oh,
could sit here and tell you you should and nag you, or I could just educate you on how amazing your heart is and how wide these vessels are.
yeah.
Hint, they're only about as wide as a headphone jack, okay? An aux cord, good old fashioned Walkman that we had in the 80s.
Yep.
Wasn't that an amazing invention, by the way? The
Yeah. I
Walkman came
know.
out, like changed the world.
It did.
Everybody had
It
these
did.
boom boxes on their shoulders, and then it
I
went to like
know.
you could shrink this thing down and put your earphones on.
Yeah.
It was
You could
mind
throw
blowing,
that,
brother.
you could clip that thing on and go for a run. What
It
this is
was a mind
crazy.
blowing,
Yeah.
epic changing when the Sony Walkman came out. Oh, wow. So that headphone jack that you plug in, that's the width of your arteries that feed your heart. Your heart pumps blood, but then of course it's a muscle, so it needs its own blood supply. So it has this recirculating flow. Those coronary arteries are the width of a headphone jack. If one of those is clogged, that's a heart attack. You're clutching your chest and you're on the floor. So you
Mm,
have, and that artery has to be open, functioning 24/7, 365, no days off from the moment it formed, which is day 28 of your life, more or
mm,
less,
mm.
to to the end of your life. It literally defines your life. If that artery gets clogged
Wow.
and sends that heart into a tailspin,
Wow.
that's it, right?
Yeah.
So now don't you start to care a little bit more? And so
Well, let me stop you there, Michael, because I just hope everyone who's listening, I'm like, see what I was saying? Like, this is what you get around a learner, because it's infectious. Like, I'm thinking, I'm 52. I'm like, I wonder if I could go back to school, become a doctor. I don't know if you know this, Michael, but actually, as a kid, my mom was the head of the emergency room nurse in a big hospital in Atlanta, and we had many conversations about would I wind up becoming a doctor. It's just
Oh, wow.
listening to you talk is like it's so infectious and so good. And you're like, what a perfect question. If you could get me to know as much about my heart or my elbow or my kidney or my whatever part of my body,
Right.
right, as you do, wouldn't it change so much instead of you just folding your arms in the white lab coat and saying you should do this and you should do that? The answer is 1,000% yes. Keep going, but I'm sold.
Yeah. Okay. Well, fantastic, brother. So yeah, here I was educating people about their bodies, inspiring them, and it was great. I absolutely loved it. On the downside, some long hours, some office politics, some paperwork, some bureaucracy, slow to change. I'd have a good idea. I'd go to a conference and have a good idea, let's say about a new type of procedure I want to perform in the clinic. And my boss like, oh, I got to take it to this committee, which after our local hospital got bought out by this big chain in another state, it added like 3 layers of committees and bureaucracy. So there was one idea that was phenomenally important, and I knew it was going to be impactful. It took over a year till I could finally roll it out with patients, right? And I was just going, golly, this is not good medical care. And I mean, and I just don't feel free to even learn and implement and be the best physician I can be when I have to deal with all these bureaucrats at these levels and take over a year to bring something in the clinic that should have been brought on Monday morning to start helping people, right?
Yeah.
So that was a bit of my dissatisfaction with the way medical care was sucked up under systems and management and micromanagement. And basically what you find is at the end of the day, the people really calling the shots are 2 types of people. The accountants, who basically are penny pinchers and want to cut costs always everywhere. They're not visionaries. They're not creative. They're not willing to take risks. They're not willing to, go into debt to finance because the future return is going to be anything. And now, perhaps I'm coming off too strong or cynical. Right?
No, you're in a room of entrepreneurs, so I think
they're just all about if we can source that screw for 2 cents less, we're going to go do it. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so they just tighten down. It's a negative. It kind of flows from a negative viewpoint, right? Which is like, how can we work everybody harder and pay them less and just tighten down everything in this organization, just squeeze every ounce of productivity and efficiency out of that. But ultimately, that's a real downer on motivation, of course. So you feel that pressure even as an employed physician under that system. So
let me stop you there for a second, Michael, because that is exactly the issue, right? I want to talk about as a high level, intelligent, highly educated, maybe the most educated in society, someone in your role is still subject to this exact same thing, labor versus management. Labor wants as much benefits and as much autonomy and as much pay as possible and as little work as possible and as little accountability as possible. And, management wants the opposite. They want as much work as possible for as little pay and as little benefits. And you have this dichotomy where work has been framed as a battle. It is win-lose. If the employee wins, the company loses. If the company wins, the employee loses. And some people think, well, yeah, that makes sense if you're like a truck driver. But I want to say from at any level of the service industry or, working at a 7-Eleven or a gas station or something, or the most, high-end white collar professional, blah, blah, blah. You know what? People are people, people are people, people are people. And I appreciate you just sharing even there in that setting, you have that same exact spirit that comes in that is not ultimately about the customer or the patient or the society or the environment or our mental health. It is purely about serving the dollar. And that's really ultimately what we're trying to come against is to say there is a different way to do business. There is a holier way to do business. There is a way of engaging in an economic situation where it is not capitalism. I mean, the worship of capital. Everything is about the dollar. And while I know some people out there may be thinking, well, that sounds kind of like a good idea, but I think you're naive, Eric. I don't think you and Michael have actually been out there in the world. Part of what you and I are pioneering and trying to do is not just another kind of ism, but it's like, can we bring the sacred back into that situation where your sacred heart is to help that patient, is to do what it takes to create the value. But that sacredness is getting profaned by saying, yeah, but if we go with this supplier or this vendor and we can save X cents per screw on this thing, then we look at the recall rate, would it cost more to settle, this claim than to do what's right? And it's like, what? Now it's like, and I think all of us are jaded. We've become used to like you're getting screwed. It's not even a question of am I getting ripped off here anymore with a big company. It's assumed I'm getting ripped off. Just how bad is it? Instead of what it should have been, what it could be, and hopefully what it will be is actually now we all have our same motivations aligned. And there is no labor versus management. There is no customer versus the company. And what we've got to do in part is what you're saying is number one is start to recognize it like you did and to go, this is wrong. I don't know what the solution is. I'm sure at that moment you weren't like, Shazam, I know exactly what to do.
Mhm.
Right. But internally, I can feel like that pure heart, that desire to serve, that sacred heart was really experiencing a shear, I don't know what the wind shear that's
Mhm.
going to like
Yeah.
tip you over and
Mhm.
make you have some of the thoughts. I'm interrupting you, but
No.
keep going with the story there.
Please keep interrupting, jumping in if something sparks. Yeah, man, that's a fantastic point. So there's that. And another group of people I found were extraordinarily powerful within the organization were the lawyers, basically risk management, right? So again, they look at everything through the view of risk, potential lawsuits, CYA,
Yeah.
paperwork, contracts, like all of that, right?
Yeah.
So um, that also stifles a lot of my sense of what I'd like to do for the patient and bringing out the best interests of the patient. It's my job to assess the medical risks and benefits in any given patient and to apply that. That's what I'm paid, commissioned, licensed, educated,
Yeah.
empowered to do.
Yeah.
But the white collars in the risk management start to shut down, a bunch of decisions and a bunch of processes and concepts because to them it doesn't make sense, for the organization, or we don't totally understand this. We're going to wait and see, et cetera, et cetera. So it
Yeah.
doesn't tend towards innovation, which doesn't tend towards best care of the patient. So between the accountants and the lawyers, it was killing my joy. It was killing my
Mm.
mojo. And it got to a point where there was some asynchrony, I guess, with me going to work every day and who I really was on the inside and my inner drive, right?
Yeah.
And it's like my inner drive was to give that base patient care experience. I knew what it would look like. I knew what it would feel like. I was ready to do it, but I only had a limited amount of time. I could only discuss certain options that were on the table. And at the end of the day, it's like I know how to make a 5-star meal, but they're making me serve McDonald's,
Yeah.
and I'm sick of it. That's not
Yeah.
me. I can't be my best self and I'm sick of it. I'm not willing to keep doing this. And even though the benefits are great and the pay is great, I'm not going to just sit here and ride this out till retirement. I don't
Yeah.
care how big my 401k gets because I can't
Yeah.
be who I want to be. And I'm not enjoying this every day. It's threatening to take my joy away. And,
See,
God didn't open up so many doors in life for me to quit and
yeah.
get burned out, 10 years into it because accountants and lawyers stole my mojo. So I
Right.
had to dig deep and then ask myself this question: how do I deal with this, right? I guess I could declare defeat and walk away and be burned out and drop out of medicine and go do something else. That's one option, right?
Right.
Other option is just be passive and cowardly and just take it and accept it and inwardly hate life for another 25 years till I retire. I guess that's
Yeah.
one option. It
Yeah.
reminds me of the saying, most men live lives of quiet desperation and
That's
die
right.
with their song still inside them. Such a
Yeah.
tragic and poignant quote,
Yeah.
but so spot on. I was like, you could be that
Yeah.
person. That's most men. All right.
Yeah,
So,
it is most people. I mean, that I was just going to point out, like, that's
right.
where the courage comes in because when you
Right.
face that contradiction and you're like,
Yeah.
this is killing my soul, but I'm kind of got a golden parachute over here,
Yeah.
or can I just bail? I think that's where the question comes is, am I given this territory to steward? Because if I'm given this territory to steward and it's getting wrecked, then I gotta steward. I gotta do something different. But I can't bail on the territory. And I do feel like a lot of people will bail on their heart's dream because somebody is in the promised land,
Mm-hmm.
and occupying forces in the
Mm-hmm.
promised land. I'm like, oh
Mm-hmm.
well, maybe I should go to a different land. And
Mm.
like, or what you said is well, maybe I should just become a slave to this
Hmm.
system and write it out because there's a, golden parachute at the end.
Hmm.
And again, like I was saying earlier, that courage is that operationalizing virtue. That is
Hmm.
like you're just, explaining it so clearly that was a moment for you to face those choices. So obviously we intuit what you did choose, but
Yeah.
take us through that next that
Well,
next
yeah,
step.
leading to the third choice as you're describing it, right? So there's a third choice, which is I stay in medicine, I stay in this realm that I'm trained, equipped, passionate for. God's provided, opened all these doors, but I recreate it. I snatch back the power from the lawyers and the accountants, and I recreate and I provide a space for that patient to get an amazing care experience. Because you know what? They deserve it. You know
Yeah.
why? Because that person's made in the image of God. And who's
Mhm.
going to bring it to them in my area, in my little sphere, if I don't?
Yeah.
Right? I'm not
Yeah.
everybody everywhere, but there's a certain number of patients who are actually depending on me. I got to bring them my best. God's sending them to me. Okay.
Mhm.
It's like the parable of the Good Samaritan. There's some people in your path and God put them there. And he's asking, are you going to pay attention? Are you willing to extend yourself? So I had to do it. So I'm like, all right. And so I, made gracious management plans for exit over about 6 months, wound some things down, hung my shingle, michaelturnermd.com in January 2020. Never ran any significant business before, hustling, learning some things. Of course, took an immediate pay cut, lost all my benefits, lost my own health
Right.
insurance. I didn't have health insurance here. I was a doctor, no health insurance,
Yeah.
like,
Yeah.
and then, and even had to borrow against my 401k to start to fund my business in the first year,
Yeah.
right? So taking some major risks and, cash flow, net worth tanking, but happier than I've been in a long time. I'm on a journey now. Like I'm living life on my terms again. This is me and God, and we got a chance to recreate some things. And you know what, Eric? I knew I wasn't going to fail. It was impossible for me to fail. It
Mm.
literally was. I felt too much guidance from God. I felt too lifted up and carried forward. It's like, again, the people march around Jericho. The angel of the Lord gave him that battle plan. So they had an insight, a divine insight to take that walled city. They had the blueprint for victory. So it's like, all right, I know I can't fail. I just got to work this process for a minute. It looks a little far out, it
Yeah.
looks a little ad hoc. I'm learning. It's not traditional, but I know I'm not going to fail. God's with me.
Yeah.
So that was, where my courage came from
Mhm.
and started, launching forward. And then interestingly enough, coincidentally enough, in quotes, right? Then COVID happened like 3 months later. And so that launched off, a whole concept for me, which was God was ultimately really positioning me to be in a place to provide that best medical care for people now in the context of a pandemic that's killing people and
Mhm.
creating fear everywhere. And so that I was ready, I was positioned.
I love that summary, and I just so appreciate, you got yourself into position of authority, of caring for people, but the context of that position was ultimately at counter purposes, and again, I'm not an expert in the medical side of things, but having heard you talk about this a fair amount, it seemed like what was on the table, the options on the table like you said, were kind of fast food options. When people really need a four-course, high-quality meal,
Mm-hmm.
we're just kind of giving them what's easy, what's convenient. It's not illegal. It may
Mm-hmm.
not be immoral. It might be immoral, but it's just kind of like, hey, fast, quick, systematic in a certain sense. And what we're losing is for this person in this situation, what's really right for them mind, body, and spirit, not
Mm-hmm.
just what pharmaceutical matches the indication or blah, blah, blah.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe talk a little bit about how the approach to medicine could be juxtaposed with an approach to health.
Mm-hmm.
I've always thought of, the doctor in its most pure form, its most archetypal,
Mm-hmm.
form is a healer. Right?
Mm-hmm.
That's what a doctor is. And in the big picture scope, you got
Mm-hmm.
warriors, right? You've got, the
Right.
poets, and you've got the technicians and the wizards, and you got a healer. Like these kind of
Mm-hmm.
core archetypes from all of human history. And you've got
Mm-hmm.
this person in a role of healer. Maybe talk a little bit about how we have, disintegrated that role in our society
Mm-hmm.
to the practice of medicine that
Mm-hmm.
that maybe isn't aimed anymore at
Mm-hmm.
healing. It's aimed at managing or You're
Hmm.
far more eloquent than I am at that. But again, the reason I'm asking you to share on that is because I want everybody to hear the idea of when we unhook our heart and our heart's purposes from our work, it might get more efficient and it might get more profitable in the short term, but it also produces a soulless area, a black hole in the
Mm.
middle of part of our marketplace where it's now all about capital. And we all know the results of that. We know that's going to be terrible in 360 degrees.
Hmm.
So maybe talk a little bit about your realization. I'm pretty sure there's probably not a class at Harvard or Stanford. There could be that is like you know, doctor versus healer. I'm
Mm.
guessing that that's maybe not even on the
Mm.
table for discussion, but give us a little bit of your insight into that.
I'd be happy to. You know, it's interesting. The metaphors that we use, the language that we use to describe the human body, and therefore by implication, the role of the physician. Okay. The current dominant metaphor is a machine.
Okay.
The body as a machine. The heart does this, the brain does that, the kidneys do this. It's all machine. They're all these little parts. Okay. And we just think of it so much that way that it's unquestioned, and we assume that's the most accurate and even most historically pervasive metaphor, but it's not.
Mm,
That really came out of the Industrial Revolution. The body as a machine came out of the Industrial Revolution. Before that, historically speaking, the dominant metaphor in healing for thousands of years was a garden, and the doctor was a gardener, therefore. And the body was seen as a plant that had its own innate capabilities, intelligence. It could grow, it could flourish. All you had to do is just arrange the conditions and then step back and let the thing flourish.
mm,
So the idea was more to advise, to give input, to accentuate, to create synergy with what was already going on, and to get out of the way, get the weeds out of the way, so to speak, and let this thing flourish. Okay. Now, consequently, I think currently with the mechanistic metaphor, the doctor goes into the technician camp. And we therefore become reactive too. It's like wait till something breaks in the machine, figure out what broke, put the new part in. So it's reactive and it's just very technical. It ignores the soul, it ignores the spirit, and it's definitely not proactive because we're not the engineer, we're not the architect. We're just wait till an assembly line machine breaks and then we fix this thing. So if we roll back time and our metaphor, then we become a healer, which is more in the role of an advisor or a gardener. You're tending something, you're creating conditions, you're respecting the innate ability of this plant, and you're thinking about how it can flourish in all its dimensions, mind, body, and spirit.
mm,
So that's where we need to get. You know, that's
mhm,
what I wanted to
mhm,
reclaim. And so I think
mhm.
right now, when I explain to my patients, a lot of new people will sign up and want to work with me, and they'll ask like, "Well, what do you do? How are you different?" and stuff. And I go, "Well, it's like asking a different question, you know." And in
Yeah.
fact, most people have their primary care doctor. I encourage them to keep their primary care. I'm not trying to replace that person's job because what I do is so different. And I
Mm,
go, it's just asking a different question, right? The question for the primary care is something broke. I go see this doctor, and what's my problem and how do I fix it? The question for me is, how can we optimize what's going on in my body, right? How can we prevent and how can we maximize? Like, where are all my systems short of being broken? How are they functioning? And how can we make them function even better to forestall anything even happening so I can actually prevent you from seeing the other doctors, or at least put it out, or,
mhm,
you know, at least mitigate it if it does have to happen.
mhm.
So it's that advising, optimizing, preventative, holistic type of
Yeah.
concept. Yeah.
So then you find yourself to use the language you were just using,
Yeah.
in the assembly line.
Right.
Hey, I've got 8 minutes to see my patient. I got
Yeah.
this time frame. I got these options, and you're like, this isn't me. This is not, like you said,
Right.
this is not about tending the garden. This is about being a cog in a wheel.
Yeah.
And then medicine has just become another kind of business, like any other quote business, where
Yep.
the heart has been taken out of it. It's disintegrated, thought of only as its component parts. I used to ask people this, and you may remember this in one of our earlier conversations about business. I'll ask people, if you have two 747s on a runway, and they're fully functional, ready to go, ready to fly. And then one of them, you just disassemble all the parts. It's still all the parts, but instead of it being assembled as an airplane, it's a pile of parts, but every single part is there. Like what do you now have? And people are like, well, you still have two airplanes. And it's like, you don't actually. One is functional and the other one is not functional. And I feel like when we disintegrate, when we think of the world or our bodies or our businesses as a pile of parts, then we lose so much of the capability that, in the case of an airplane or the human body, is miraculous. It's like we're suspending the laws of gravity in this giant, heavy metal. Like, how in the world could this thing fly? We think of a butterfly could fly, but how
Hmm.
could this giant piece of metal fly? And in that same way, we steward the human body and we get in touch with its design, it does orders of magnitude more miracles than even an airplane could do. But that
Right.
that is lost on us, right? When we go the disintegrated, dissected route of the technician instead of the holistic approach. So as this was, obviously some version of this is in your heart and in your mind as you're making your transition, and you're like, hey, I'm going to get out of this system. What were some of the lines of demarcation that you crossed over into saying, well, I am going to launch my own thing. I am going to do my own thing. What were some of those maybe scarier decisions that, had some pretty big unknowns on the other side of it, aside from, of course, the financial part of it? What were maybe some of the other things? I don't know if you felt like everybody else thinks this, but I think that, in the
Hmm.
community of doctors that you're in or whatnot, maybe share
Hmm.
some of those challenges.
Well, it was that, yeah, it's swimming against the grain, swimming against the current, let's say. Most independent doctors have been getting their practices bought out and sold, and willingly selling them over the
Yeah.
last, couple decades. So there's this conglomeration and economies of scale, et cetera, that's been going on in medical practice. So here I was intending to do the exact opposite. So very counterintuitive, risky. Nobody else I knew was doing it. All the doctors I had known in my town that were independent had either retired or sold out to the bigger hospital system, actually.
Mhm.
So, yeah, there was a big unknown on the other side of it, financially. I think professionally, in terms of my relationship with patients, I knew I was going to be successful. Patients like me. I like patients. So,
Mhm.
I was going to recreate a time and space for us both to get what we wanted out of the encounter. And so I knew that was going to be fulfilling.
Yeah.
So, you know,
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah.
And then a pandemic.
Mhm. Mhm.
And then the decision making that that came from leadership, in light of such a, well, obviously unique. I mean, in the last couple hundred years, there have
Mhm.
been other pandemics, but probably not one that fell into this set of circumstances. I feel like,
Mhm.
from a leadership standpoint, we were talking about courage earlier, and
Mhm.
we're talking about disintegration. What happens when a leader listens to a technical expert, and then instead of creating a comprehensive decision and plan of action, takes one bit of technical advice, turns that into policy, and does that over and over and over? Again, I'm
Mhm.
not qualified to judge the medical side of a lot of that, but from the
Mhm.
logical side,
Mhm.
to say, well, we need to be 6 feet apart.
Mhm.
That's the rule now. Okay. Where did that come from? Some expert made
Mhm.
that statement, and they got all the degrees and they're published and
Mhm.
they're this and that. And so an expert told me that. So that's what we're going to do. Now, another expert says, blah, blah, blah. We're going to do that. And a different expert says, blah, blah, blah. And there's nobody saying, what's the cumulative effect of any of those bits of expert information? Not saying whether they're true or false. Let's just, for the sake of argument, say they're all true.
Mhm.
It is the case that you can do everything right while you're driving your car and get killed. It is right to put your hands at 2 o'clock and 10 o'clock. It is right to look over your shoulder before you turn. It is right to move the gear shift. Any one of those actions can be, quote, right and
Mm-hmm.
deadly
Mm-hmm.
because the sequence they're in means
Mm-hmm.
you're going to drive off the cliff. It's
Mm-hmm.
like, but I did everything right. And I feel like
Mm-hmm.
a lot of times in the modern world, we've not been taught how to
Mm-hmm.
think. We've been
Mm-hmm.
taught what to think. We are specialists in a world where we need generalists. We need
Mm-hmm.
integrators.
Mm-hmm.
I was reading David Epstein's book, Range, which I highly recommend.
Mm-hmm.
And it is on learning. It's a little bit more geared towards the ways that people learn. High performers, Tiger Woods, Roger Federer, Gary Kasparov, other folks like that. It's, to me, I'm a nerd about stuff like that, so I
Mm-hmm.
I love it. But what it's saying is, when we are hyper specialized, there's the doctor of left earlobe cancer.
Mm-hmm.
That's what I do. I know everything about that.
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
like you said, it's like, yeah, but it's a garden. It's not just the earlobe. The earlobe, the old funny song, the knee bone's
Mm-hmm.
connected to the thigh bones connected. It's like, right, it's all connected. And I think Western education, not just in medicine, but in general, has gone into this hyper specialization, with
Mm-hmm.
the idea of the path to success is becoming the absolute world authority on ovarian cancer in migratory carrier pigeons that live in Nova Scotia.
Mm-hmm.
Which again, I'm not putting that down to say that's not great and that's not amazing. But if everyone in academia or in higher learning has become so highly specialized and
Mm-hmm.
siloed that there
Mm-hmm.
is no broader connections, then what happens is, if you don't have a highly specialized credential, you're stupid. You can't make any decisions on your
Mm-hmm.
own.
Mm-hmm.
This expert said you have to do this. And we've forgotten there's another kind of expertise, which is the expertise around integration and seeing the
Mm-hmm.
big picture and seeing the macro effect of the micro decision. Um, I'm trying to wind you up here and turn you loose.
Mm-hmm.
Tell us your thoughts on how that, when we ran into COVID, maybe some of your thoughts about how we
Mm-hmm.
navigated that in ways that maybe weren't the best.
Mm-hmm. Sure, you make some great points. I think one of the things that comes to mind, we talk about leaders listening to an expert, making a decision, being very smug and self-confident about that decision, not reevaluating it, making a new decision, not considering the cumulative effect, right? When you think about all that, well, let's turn it into a generalized leadership lesson that we can learn from, including running our businesses, right? And to me, there are two aspects of the answer, but the first part is vision. The problem is they're not operating from a vision, they're
Mhm.
just reacting, right? So they're not operating, there's no positive agenda involved. Like,
Boom.
this is what we want to see for the United States, or this is what we want to see. This is the kind of community or culture we want to see with these core values.
Mhm.
There's just reactions to perceived problems, and then knee-jerk reactions, which then again is sort of like chess. When you make a move, there's a world of opportunities that just disappear.
Yeah,
There's a whole possibility set, to use laws of mathematics and probabilities, that are off the table. They can never happen. And if you make another move, that narrows it down even more. Now, it also opens up other ones,
that's right.
but you're leaving behind
Yeah.
options. And if you make two or three wrong moves, you find yourself back into a corner. It's checkmate. You don't quite know how you got there. Well, you had no vision for how to win that game in the first place. You're just reacting, getting scared, right? And so lack of vision is one problem there. But then the other one I would say is lack of principles. Those leaders weren't principle driven. They're more public opinionated and again, reactionary. It's like, well, if we don't throw masks on everybody, we're going to have fear in the population. And how might that look for my numbers? And how's that going to play out on NBC News? Where at least if I get up and say, everybody throw a mask on, I'm looking like I'm doing something, because, we need to be seen as doing something right now. Right.
Mhm.
So it's many times driven by, public opinion and, licking your finger and sticking it up and see what kind of decision we need to make. It's not principle based. So
Yeah.
you can't have good leadership without
Yeah.
those two elements, I think. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Well, again, I think we have not done ourselves any favor by the way we've structured education, because in general, we have taught sit down, be quiet, disconnect from your body, get up in your head, learn this set of facts. In fact, in that
Mhm.
book by David Epstein, he mentions this crazy statistic. He was like, if you take a group of, let's just say, seventh graders and you teach them a math topic, let's say it's like factoring binomials. I did teach math for a little while, but don't hold me to it. But let's do factoring binomials. Okay. Some of you guys
Mhm.
are like, oh my gosh, I can't believe you're saying this. FOIL, first, outer, inner, last, right? All right.
Mhm.
So we know how we do all that stuff, right? Okay. So we teach that for 30 minutes and then we give our seventh graders a test. They're going to do pretty good because we just did that one thing and we give them the test. That makes perfect
Mhm.
sense. And that's how we teach. If we were to modify that a little bit and we gave them that lecture on factoring binomials, and then we gave them 5 minutes of some different content not related to that, and then we gave them the test, as we would all assume, they do a little worse, a little further away from the content that we just did. And then finally, the third example he gives, same thing, you teach the same content, but then you give a long stretch of content unrelated, and then you give them the test. And you would assume, just like you would, that they would do worse. So the people who did the best got the content and then tested right away. Second place, they got the content, they got different content and tested a little bit later. And then the worst performers got the content, had a lot of other content not related, and then took the test. Now, interestingly enough, I think in his study that he was citing, it was a week later, but it could have been a month later. Everybody was given the same test again, just out of nowhere, that same test. And the results were opposite.
Hmm.
A month later, if your test was harder, I had to work harder to skip over the biology lesson you gave me and the history lesson you gave. I just skip over that in my mind and reach back to that math thing we were doing an hour ago. If I had to do that to take my test, I got a higher score a week later because I worked harder for the knowledge. Now, it doesn't mean that a week later I scored better than the people who scored,
Mhm.
best the first time, but it
Mhm.
means the way I approached the learning increased my recall. There was more long-term retention, and
Mhm.
therefore there actually was a larger change. If we teach people just for the test, this score looks great. Hey, we taught it, you took the test, you got an A, let's move on. But that has been the goal of education now for at least 50 plus years. Instead of, I'm teaching you how to think, I'm teaching you how to apprehend knowledge, not just comprehend knowledge. And so
Mhm.
that, I feel like that has set all of us up for
Mhm.
problems in numerous places, not the least of which, most glaringly, I think, has been, our
Mhm.
response to COVID. So here you are,
Mhm.
heart full of passion, highly educated, highly motivated. You go to school, you pop out as a doctor, you're doing your thing in the system. It doesn't seem to be the right thing. You say, hey, maybe there's some misaligned motivations here. It's not
Mhm.
where I want to be deployed in this mechanism, but it is the right area. You start your own practice, you're doing things this way. We run into this massive, massive medical problem, social
Mhm.
problem with COVID and whatnot. Um, Now things are moving, let's kind of fast forward a year or two into this.
Mhm.
You said, hey, 2020, maybe let's come out to 2022.
Mhm.
What were you starting to learn? What were you starting to see in terms of how to navigate that, not just as a doctor, but as an entrepreneur and just as a moral, courageous man? What were
Mhm.
you facing at that point? What did you learn? And how did that
Yeah. Well, I was facing two moral, professional, personal crises within medicine at that point, all related to COVID. And then one was about the best way to care for patients. Okay, so simple question. You got COVID. What's the best way to care for you? Medically, and from an integrative medicine perspective, there are a bunch of options on the table. Politically, however, we are being told that certain options were off the table. For example, ivermectin or hydroxychloroquine. Okay. And depending on where you were, this was more or less stridently enforced. In my state, Washington State, it was extraordinarily enforced. So the Washington State Medical Commission came out with a position statement that basically said it is medical malpractice in our state if you do any of the following. Number one, speak against masks. Number two, speak against the vaccine. Number three, prescribe hydroxychloroquine or ivermectin. It's malpractice and we will come after you.
Mm.
Okay. They came out with a position statement, made big news splash. I already knew that this was working. Many of these medications, I was seeing the benefit in my patients. So I couldn't ethically stop helping the people from doing what I know was right, even though most other doctors stopped, pharmacies stopped filling it. I would write prescriptions. The pharmacies didn't want to touch this thing, right? They don't want Washington State crawling all over their business. So pharmacies weren't filling it. I had patients die for lack of access to it. I could tell stories about that. It's very sad, troubling. I've had patients revive and come out of the hospital when spouses snuck in ivermectin that they obtained. I'm not even sure how, but they hid it in their purse and gave it to grandpa, and grandpa came out of the hospital 3 days later and the doctors were all stunned. There are plenty of stories like that. So I found myself basically feeling like I was part of this, like the Underground Railroad, this underground resistance movement towards freedom and towards what was right, and actually, lives in the balance. So it was exhilarating at the same time as, a bit shocking,
Nerve-wracking.
You can imagine a bunch of words, adjectives, emotions wrapped up in that, right?
Sure.
So there was that question, how best to treat patients. And then there was this other question about the vaccine, which when it came out initially, I was cautiously optimistic about it. I had gotten all my vaccinations up to that point. I was by no means a quote anti-vax, unquote person. And so I figured a lot of smart people spend a lot of time and energy to come out with vaccine. I'll take all options on the table to help us get out of this pandemic. So I like ivermectin, I like hydroxychloroquine, I like, vitamin D, all of that. But if this is also helpful, then I like this as well. And let's see, I'm giving it the benefit of the doubt, right? So I got my vaccinations, recommended them, et cetera. But then as time went on, I started to notice, as well as research and understand more about how they were developed, what they are truly, et cetera, became disillusioned. So that also was a crisis of faith, to the point where I went to the anti-COVID vaccine rally in Washington, D.C. It was on the Mall in 2021. And I came back from that and I said, that's it. I've got to go public with how I feel about this, even though it's going to run afoul of Washington State, like extraordinarily. I just can't in my conscience. So I wrote a position piece called "Losing My Vaccine Religion: A Doctor's Journey from Hope to Despair," which you can go find on the internet. It's on my Substack channel. That got a lot of press. It got a lot of views. I got invited to some talk shows and some webinars and, this and that. But it was also a real courageous measure for me. It was a little bit of a line in the sand too. I knew with Washington State, I'm like, I'd already been prescribing some meds that they didn't like, but when I came out strong against the vaccine, I go, I know they're going to take notice about this. I'm in their bullseye. There's absolutely no going back now.
Yeah. So what happened?
Well, so Washington State Washington State encouraged people to basically report doctors who are violating these standards.
Sure.
Yeah. Sort of like any totalitarian state, they start encouraging snitches to turn people into the government. So that's what started happening. So all these anonymous complaints started to be filed against me, like, hey, Dr. Turner prescribed ivermectin to somebody I know. And what's interesting is it was never the patient who filed the complaint, because the patients were all happy. They had come to see me. I had given the medication. They were all getting better. I had literally had zero problems with the medication. I never had a patient come back and say it didn't work or it made me sick or anything. Zero times. Okay. So it was never the patient. It was somebody like tangentially associated with the patient, like their aunt, who's a nurse, who was really upset that this quack doctor is giving out this horse medicine. Right. And so Washington State made it politically inviting to start narking on doctors who would be involved in this. So the anonymous complaints started rolling in, redacted names and stuff like that, saying, did you treat this patient? Show me all your records, et cetera. So it's very intimidating. Most doctors would have quit at this point. I'm too pugnacious and principle based, and, I'm a Christian. So, the righteous flee when no one pursues, or the wicked flee when no one pursues, but the righteous are bold as a lion. It's a proverb, and I stand on that. So it's stressful. I got to go get a lawyer. I'm getting these letters. I would have a sinking, tight feeling in my stomach every time I see this big fat letter show up in, green. I knew exactly what it looked like from Washington State Medical Commission. I knew it was inside that thing. Another complaint, another investigation, another request for documents, another threatening tone to the whole thing. And these were rolling. I was racking them up 4, 5, 6, 7. I think it escalated up to 12 or 13. God provided a lawyer to represent me pro bono. He did an amazing job. I could tell that whole story. But once I could offload it to the lawyer, I had to just leave it there on my pillow at night. I'm like, it's in God's hands, it's in the lawyer's hands. Meanwhile, I got to continue doing what I need to do. So,
Mhm.
fast forward, my Washington State case went to trial a couple months ago, and literally just yesterday, I got the verdict in my email inbox, which is, guilty. You're guilty of using ivermectin, negligently. We consider it malpractice, and you can no longer do that. And you have to write a big letter of apology about how you were wrong, and you have to take some re-education classes,
Mhm.
and and you got to write a paper that's at least X number of words long, and you got to submit to random audits of your practice. Okay,
Mhm. Mhm.
signed and delivered by order of the court. Blah blah blah. That was just yesterday. Just showed up.
Wow. Wow.
So we're going to have to figure some things out, right?
Yeah.
But we're still moving forward in terms of my medical practice. It's not shutting down my medical practice as a whole. This is one piece of what we do. We're going
Mhm.
to be wise, figure out how we need to respond. But yeah, there's
Mhm.
a cost.
Mhm.
I'm paying the cost right now. So
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Well, those things in the short term obviously are incredibly stressful and all that goes along
mhm,
with it. But it's also the case that we look back at those people and we go, wow, they stood firm. Wow, that was
mhm,
great. Because, well, I think there's a lot of good people in the system, and I would say that in most systems in the United States, whether it's government or medical or business or whatever, I
mhm,
do think there's a lot of really good moral people. That's a different question than how is the system set up to govern or to create behaviors? So if you put a good person in an unexamined or an unrighteous system, you're still going to get unrighteous results. And then when you start adding to that system layers of systems to preserve the system, then you start to see some really crazy things where it's like somebody who's a whistleblower, right? Let's just go back to the big tobacco case, back, 20 years ago, however long it was, right? It's like, hey, there's a guy who's telling the truth, but the entire system can be worked in such a way to shame him, intimidate him. If you haven't seen the movie The Insider, Russell Crowe and Al Pacino back in the day, again, that whole story should make everybody take a moment and say, our system has to include the ability to dissent. It's got to
mhm,
include the ability to think critically, to think,
mhm,
lateral, thinking where we're looking at different things. And I think that most of the way that our systems are built in an unrighteous world is really to preserve power. It's to preserve the status quo. I mean, for example, when I think it came out recently, somebody said, yeah, the whole thing about 6 feet apart. Yeah, we don't even know who came up with that. um, or the thing about, COVID will survive on metallic or metal surfaces for up to 3 weeks. Having been in the military, I know what the process is to decontaminate from, chemical and biological weapons. And it's tedious is not even close to the word, and whatever you did to decontaminate, if it did work, all it takes is the slightest thing. Oh, I
mhm,
forgot. And I rubbed my face. That's it. You now have got to do the 35-minute charcoal powder process all over again. And I remember just hearing some of these things, it just doesn't pass the sniff test of logic to
mhm,
say if it's that contagious and that robust and it will last that long on those surfaces,
mhm,
that what we should do is stand 6 feet apart. But one expert was probably saying point A, another expert was saying point B, but there was no general leadership, like you said, with a vision to say these two things are not compatible. If in other words, we've got to have a way to combine information and
mhm,
to understand an overall strategy instead of, like you said, where it's just the CYA and
mhm,
and, and if you're in power, be in power. What I would have really
mhm,
appreciated and what I think could still happen is actually just apologies to
mhm,
say, well, the Lancet study we were referring to actually turned out to not have been peer reviewed. So what we recommended based on that really wasn't the right thing.
mhm,
And we're
mhm,
very sorry about that. And here's what we're going to do in the future to keep that from happening. Instead of it's like, no, 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 we won't even acknowledge anything. I mean, I'm sure you've seen the headlines
Mhm.
where it shows the efficacy of the vaccine as reported in the media,
Mhm.
99%, 96%,
Mhm.
32%. And now we're on, I think, the 10th booster is what's
Mhm.
recommended. And again, I got vaccinated,
Mhm.
when I was in the military. I got vaccinated as a kid. I'm not like against vaccinations, but
Mhm.
what I am against is the big brother authoritarian totalitarian of thing. You can't even ask the question.
Mhm.
That's like religious. Like we're
Mhm.
now getting into like
Mhm.
actual dogma of
Right.
like it's wrong of you to even pose the question, much less get an answer. And that's so dangerous, and that's again, to your battle and what you're going through when righteous people stand up and go, look, this is the reality on the ground, and we have to speak truth to power as a point of accountability. And it doesn't mean that we're right about everything, but it does mean that when people in power are their object number one, stay in power. Objective number two, stay in power. Objective number three, stay in power. When that becomes the guiding vision, then it puts us all in danger. I know a lot of people are nervous right now about the dollar and it losing its reserve currency status. Same problem, the same thinking. We're going to do this thing and it adds $1 trillion to the debt. We're going to do this thing, it adds $1 trillion to the debt. We're going to shut down business, in violation of the Constitution. We're going to shut down businesses. We're going to shut down the right to assemble. We're going to shut down jury trials. All this happened during COVID. Like massive parts of the Constitution just got overwritten, overruled.
Mhm.
And I think a lot of it is because we don't think broadly in the ways that we should. Um, okay, so not to go so far down the rabbit hole of like how bad things are,
Mhm.
there's a lot of good things that are happening. There's good. What are you seeing, maybe even in this area of medicine? You can address it specifically with COVID or the vaccine or some of those things. What are some things that are making you say, "Hey, people are seeing the light, people are standing up"? Or even more broadly, just in medicine, as I think we would all agree the arc of history is pretty positive. We're not putting leeches on people to suck out the bad blood anymore, right? So
Mhm.
we
Mhm.
are generally progressing, even though
Mhm.
we've had these huge things to deal with. So maybe talk to us a little bit about kind of the trend that you're seeing or things that are making you feel optimistic.
Mhm. Sure. Well, as regards the COVID vaccine, there's a trend to optimism, which is to say the truth always works its way out in the end. I believe the truth is more powerful than any lie. You can't keep it bottled up forever.
Mhm.
It's going to just kind of worm its way out and break out, right? And so that's happened with the vaccine as more and more evidence is built up, both scientifically and with people's observations of Aunt so and neighbor so and so who got sick or died coincidentally shortly after the shot, right? There's more and more public skepticism and more interest and independent investigation and inquiry. Than ever before. And it's very one directional, meaning nobody ever goes from being critical of the vaccine because of all the problems and saying, you know what, I was wrong. This vaccine is actually amazing now. I changed my mind. That never happens. It's one directional, always from the other side forward. So with the passage of time, more truth, more one directional flow, you've got basically a critical mass at this point who know this thing is, a pile of parts on the vaccine runway.
Yeah.
It's not, it doesn't fly. It's
Yeah.
not helpful. So that's actually positive. The other thing I'd say it's positive is a little bit of a reawakening of the individual consumer to say, I've got to recreate a better healthcare scenario for me and my family. I've got to
Hmm.
do something better and different. I can't trust what NBC Nightly News is telling me. I can't necessarily trust what Fauci or the CDC is saying. I got to rethink this and I got to create a time and space, maybe apart from just my corner doctor, primary care who worked for the big hospital Mc corporation.
Hmm.
What's really going to work, right?
Hmm.
So there are doctors and patients meeting up now outside that system to say, let's do care better together. We both realize the necessity of it now. Doctors have always realized the necessity of it, I think increasingly over the last 10, 20 years because of all the corporate forces at work. So doctors always knew this wasn't great, hence the high rates of burnout.
Okay.
But now the public is awakening to the idea that it's really not great and that we need to reimagine healthcare. And so they're voting with their dollars and their feet, and that's positive. There are new associations of medical care, new ways of delivering it being imagined and created as we speak, and that is exciting.
Yeah, yeah. All right, so let's do this. I think what this is an example of, and again, I just want to say to all of you guys who are solopreneurs or intrapreneurs, you're not quite an entrepreneur yet. You've not taken the step that Dr. Turner's taken. You've not taken the step that I took. I had a good job at a really great business coaching company and just quit to start my own thing. But I would say the process that you're hearing from Dr. Turner is exactly the process that I was on. I was like, this isn't ultimately good. It sells and there are good parts to it, but it could be so much better. I would just want to encourage you guys, stand up, launch, gird up your loins, get into the battle. Because the more of us that say, I'm not doing this anymore, the faster things will change. And that is actually all it takes. It does not take the right person becoming the president. That'd be great. The right person getting into this Senate seat or a Congress position or all that's great. And that'll be wonderful. But if we all sit around waiting for that to happen, like it's the big panacea, then we're actually contributing to the problem. I think that a lot of us know in our hearts that many of the systems that we've inherited, while they may have started off with good intentions, have been allowed to grow into things that are quite antithetical to where they started. And the question is why? And I think the answer goes back to that quote you said, Michael,
Hmm.
and ones that to me are similar to it. Evil prevails when good men do nothing.
Hmm.
The Teddy Roosevelt quote about the man in the arena.
Hmm.
Those quiet, timid souls, cold souls who sit in the stands and
Hmm.
mock, but
Hmm.
they never know the thrill of victory or the depths of defeat. They don't
Hmm.
have mud on their face. I'm ruining
Hmm.
his beautiful, you
Hmm.
know, poem there, but it's like I would just encourage everybody who's hearing this, who's like, I do have an entrepreneurial spark in me. I do have that heart level passion to see change. And I would say change what you're in. Like, don't be like, I'm going to quit my job in accounting and I'm going to go launch a revolutionary new automobile company. I mean, hey, if that's your thing, that's great. But don't feel like you have to abandon the territory you're in because you're probably in that territory to
Hmm.
transform that territory. I'm not
Hmm.
saying you should quit your job. That's what the two of us have done. But I'm saying that might be something to consider is do you really need to keep riding on the Titanic and waiting for someone else to do something? Or is it time for you to do something? And only you can know what that is, and only you can know what the right timing is. But I will say this, there is no riskless strategy.
Hmm.
Staying put and hunkered down has its own risk. And going out there and facing the lion has its own risk. The question is, at the end of your time on the planet, are you going to look back at one strategy and say, I'm proud of the risk I took, whether it worked or not?
Hmm.
Or are you
Hmm.
going to look at back at it and go, I kind of took the easy way and I wish I had it to do over again. I'll guarantee you at every major turning point in human history, there were a small group of people who did the amazing thing. They did
Hmm.
whatever it was, the founding of our country or other points along history where they did the amazing thing. But there was a much, much larger group who could have helped them, but did not help them, that never got that pit out of their stomach of I could have made a difference and I didn't make the difference. And you don't ever want to be in that group. So
Hmm.
wherever that is for you, you stay at home mom or stay at home dad or you're executive or wherever you're at, you're already a business owner. I feel like today the thing to take is it takes courage to face down the systems that are guiding us in pretty much every area of life toward a big cliff. Not to be is such a downer, but it's like we got to be honest. It's like, and to put the positive side to it, all it takes is action. it doesn't take, some unbelievable thing. It's like, no, just, follow Dr. Turner's example. Stand up. Let your truth be known. Because when we're silent, the dark forces, the deceptions, and the selfish, self-interested, profit-driven,
Mm.
machinery will just continue to plow over us. So, um, as we land the plane here, what's ahead for you? What do you look out in the next, 3 to 5 years, to whatever degree, you feel comfortable sharing? What are you excited
Yeah.
about? What are you looking forward to? And, what's got your heart pumping these days?
Yeah, two main initiatives that come to mind. I want to start a membership-based community. We're going to build this out. It's going to be called Mana Plus,
Mm,
and it's a place where you can come and have an integrated source of resources and opportunities in coaching to tend that garden of your health, right? You want to become the healthiest possible version of yourself in mind, in body, and in spirit. And I'm going to try to provide the ultimate place and what I think is a unique vision of that. I have not found it anywhere else that you can go and find those resources and find that group or individual coaching or whatever you need to get yourself there. So we're working furiously on that at the moment. It's going great. We want to launch that maybe in a month or two. The other thing I'm excited about is some podcasting and TV show opportunities. Sort of like I imagine it as Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood. That's
mm,
kind of my vision for myself. I want to be the Mr. Rogers of this generation right now. Speaking to adults, however, but be warm and welcoming and inviting and educational, kind of
mm,
all at the same time. And that the love of God would come out in that. And so I want to pursue more mass media opportunities along those lines. I'm having some things shape up and come together. It's been really exciting.
that's awesome. That's awesome. Well, if
Yeah.
you guys want to learn more about Dr. Turner, visit his website or Substack. If you want to give us those addresses, we'll put them in the show notes. But go ahead and share them with us.
Sure. Well, thank you. My website is michaelturnermd.com. So it's all one word, all lowercase, Michael, turnermd.com. And then my Substack is drturner.substack.com.
Awesome, awesome. Well, Michael, as always, it's just incredible to call you friend and colleague and brother, and
Mm,
you're such a incredible motivation for me and a point of light in the universe. And keep fighting the fight, brother.
mm.
We'll get it done one way or the other.
We will. Thank you. Yeah, we're arm in arm in this deal here, Eric, along with many other people of goodwill, and it's been great to know you. I've enjoyed working together, and I want to continue on to the future. I know God's got some exciting things in store for how we need to occupy some space and encourage some people together. Yeah.
Absolutely, man. Absolutely. All right, brother. Thank you.
Thank you. Take care.